Maybe, just maybe, nutrition science has never really been about science at all. The Nutrition Coalition was founded in 2015 with the primary goal of ensuring that the US nutrition policy is based on rigorous scientific evidence. This is important for everyone because the dietary guidelines around the world have been heavily influenced by the US ever since low-fat recommendations were introduced in 1977. Nina Teicholz, the Nutrition Coalition's executive director, is concerned. She says, the last two meetings of the 2020 US Dietary Guidelines Committee have revealed many alarming problems. The process lacks transparency. It excludes large numbers of rigorous studies, instead relying primarily on weak data for its conclusions. Virtually all committee members have long lists of conflict of interest with food, pharmaceutical, and/or supplement companies that may well influence their decision-making. In particular, Joan Sabat, chair of the nutrition department at Loma Linda University, owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, teaches a vegetarian-vegan doctrine as part of the church's health ministry. He's an unpaid member of the Scientific Advisory Board for the Californian Walnut Commission, and he has received grants from the nut, soya, and avocado growers. In 2018, he co-authored The Global Influence of the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Diet. Not only does it summarize years of my own research, the researchers acknowledge my work. The paper is an historical perspective on the ideology of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and their subsequent influence on nutrition science and dietary guidelines worldwide. It reinforces the biblical Garden of Eden diet, fruits, nuts, and seeds, as constituted the diet chosen for us by our Creator. Ellen G. White also claimed, a religious life can be more successfully gained and maintained if meat is discarded, for this diet stimulates into intense activities, lustful propensities, and enfeebles the moral and spiritual nature. She taught that as the spiritual children of Israel, God's commandment-keeping people, they are to follow the health principles of Deuteronomy and Leviticus in the First Testament, and she's reiterated the eating of the fat and the blood of animals was strictly forbidden. Personally, I don't believe religious ideology of any description should be informing population-wide public policy, but I find it especially concerning to promote a nutrient-deficient diet, fruits, nuts, and seeds, and forsaking animal proteins and fats for salvation. Adventists are young earth creationists who believe the second coming is imminent. Ellen G. White wrote, among those who are waiting for the coming of the Lord, meat eating will eventually be done away with. Flesh will cease to form a part of their diet. But it isn't just ideology we need to be concerned about. Ties to industry also pose a problem for those on the 2020 US Dietary Guidelines Committee, including Jamie Ard, who has served as the medical director for Nestlé's OptiFast, a low-calorie food replacement, for over 10 years. He also serves on advisory boards for pharmaceutical companies, all of which make drugs targeted at nutrition-related disease. At least 6 of members of the Dietary Guidelines Committee are funded or have consulted to ILSI, the International Life Sciences Institute, which was founded in 1978 by Coca-Cola's then vice president, with the express purpose of uniting the food industry. With more than 400 members of the world's leading manufacturers of food and food ingredients, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and other consumer products, ILSI wields great influence on our global food and health policy. While it has been repeatedly exposed as trying to manipulate science, it's a very powerful organisation and it barely flinches. Russ Greene made the comment in an article he wrote in 2018. If a corporation presents a conflict of interest, then a non-profit it founded and/or funds presents a conflict of interest as well. In March, at the final meeting of the committee, members suggested they'd like to lower the caps on saturated fats even further, from the current recommendation as 10% of daily calorie intake, with future recommendations down to maybe 7% of calories, or even less, possibly even 0. These ideas are contrary to a steadily growing consensus among top researchers that the caps on saturated fats were never based on strong science. It appears the future of any saturated fats in our dietary guidelines at all depends on this 4-person subcommittee with known conflicts of interest and both personal and ideological bias. Before I go any further, I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly share Gary's own health journey with you, one that would lead to his interest in nutrition for the prevention, management, and even the reversal of metabolic disease impacting many of his patients. In 2016, Gary became the only medical doctor in the world silenced from advocating nutrition to improve health outcomes. I was determined to clear his name, so I took a deep dive and began my research to investigate the vested interest shaping our dietary and health guidelines. The processed food and beverage industries, and even the pharmaceutical industry, have a lot to gain from us eating highly processed foods and becoming dependent on a broken healthcare system focused on band-aiding sick care. But I never expected to find religious ideology and the corporate church shaping guidelines too. The introduction of the terms lifestyle medicine and exercise medicine have been founded to allow prescriptions to be written by health professionals, encouraging people to move more and eat less meat. My topic may be a little confronting if it's the first time you've heard it, and honestly, it's challenging even to me. In fact, we didn't discuss my research publicly for over 2 years. Everything I share with you today is, or has been, available on the internet. Please let Tracy know if you have any questions at all. I hope to be able to answer them in an upcoming Q&A session we have planned. Now, let me introduce you to my husband, Dr. Gary Fettke. What I love about him is that he goes to work every day with the perspective of a patient, the spirit of an activist, and the heart of a healer. And that's why I was so determined to clear his name when he was reported to the medical board in 2014. Gary's only crime was to become interested in nutrition and begin to understand food as medicine. So what motivated an orthopedic surgeon of 20 years to suddenly become interested in nutrition in the first place? Gary describes himself as a fat kid who grew into an athletic young man by outrunning a diet filled with way too many processed carbohydrates, low-fat dairy, and meals cooked with heart-healthy polyunsaturated oils. At 38, he was diagnosed with an aggressive pituitary tumor requiring surgery. This was followed by radiotherapy and many, many years of chemotherapy. Despite modern medicine, the tumor continued to be active, and Gary required further surgery in 2004. Over the next few years, he ended up on a cocktail of medications, some simply to counteract the side effects of others he was taking at the time. By 2009, Gary was watching his weight creep on, he was pre-diabetic, had high blood pressure, and was developing cardiac arrhythmias. He never gave significant thought to his diet because, as far as he was concerned, he was doing the right thing. This is the 1992 food pyramid that influenced Gary as a young doctor and no doubt most households in Australia for 2 decades. 6 to 9 servings of carbohydrates were recommended daily. Incredibly, one serve of bread was 2 slices back then, not 1 like today. We've come to understand Gary's pituitary tumor thrives on glucose sugar, as clearly demonstrated in his original PET scans. It honestly lit up like a Christmas tree. So reducing sugar and carbohydrates and reintroducing healthy fats back into his diet has stopped his cancer in its tracks. It's our miracle and our biggest reward. After he'd been low carb, keto for about a year, Gary tried going off chemotherapy. This was done under medical supervision with regular checkups. He has been off chemotherapy for nearly 7 years now, with no sign of any cancer cell activity on blood tests. This was impossible for Gary to achieve on a high-carb, plant-based diet. I'm not saying that surgery, radiation and chemotherapy didn't have their place in the management of his cancer, but I am asking why diet wasn't considered as an adjunct therapy right from the start. Following his own health improvement, Gary started to consider how dietary changes may help not only his patients, but the wider community with weight-related joint issues, inflammation, and the complications of diabetes. After years of feeling like he was helpless, LCHF became the missing piece of the health jigsaw puzzle. Inspired by the thought that he could provide tangible strategies to help people, he worked with dietitians at Nutrition for Life to create resources and handouts, including simple graphics to help them start taking back control of their health. Low-carb swaps are easy. Consider that this bolognese sauce with pasta has 62.5 grams of carbohydrates. As there's approximately 4 grams of carbs per teaspoon of glucose sugar, this meal would equate to 15.5 teaspoons, compared to the same sauce served with zucchini noodles at only 5.9 grams of carbs, or 1.5 teaspoons. Long-term rollercoaster blood glucose levels come with very real risk of diabetes complications, including retinopathy, kidney and heart disease, and peripheral neuropathy leading to ulcerations of the feet and ultimately amputation. There is a link between sugar and diabetes complications, and it's becoming more and more obvious. Type 2 diabetes isn't just a disease of people in retirement anymore. It's affecting younger and younger people, even children in our community. So 20 years ago, Gary might have seen someone with a non-healing ulcer on their feet only once or twice a year. By 2016, he was seeing someone in his orthopaedic clinic every single week in northern Tasmania. And in the week before Christmas of 2018, he saw 4 people requiring debridement of rotting flesh who would eventually require amputation. Band-aiding sick care wasn't why Gary went into medicine. He felt hospitals should be setting an example of health to the community, like they did when the harms of smoking became known. It's hard to imagine now, but 30 years ago, cigarettes were sold to patients in their hospital beds, and smoking was not uncommon on the wards. So now it seems ridiculous that a public hospital, a place where patients are meant to heal and recover, is the very place that's feeding them unlimited sugar and highly processed foods. This graph clearly highlights the difference between high-carb and low-carb diabetes management and Gary's concerns. Frustrated that things weren't changing more quickly, Gary became vocal about public health advocacy, and in 2013 he called for the removal of junk food from hospital vending machines, supported by Legislative Council member the Honourable Kerry Finch. Gary tried numerous times to speak with the dietetics department, firstly to ask their opinion on the growing research around sugar, processed carbohydrates and diabetes management. Unfortunately, the dietetics department weren't as excited as he was about his findings. I'm not sure if they didn't want to know achieving normal blood glucose levels was possible by doing the exact opposite of their high-carb recommendations, or if they just didn't want Gary to be the one to talk about it first. Gary was reported to the medical board by a dietitian in 2014 at the encouragement of the Dietitians Association of Australia. You may ask, how do we know this? Well, in 2017, Gary was given access to a vexatious and unsubstantiated 845-page submission to AHPRA on behalf of the Tasmanian Health Service. Within the document, Gary found 2 letters from the then CEO of the Dietitians Association of Australia, addressed to the then CEO of the Launceston General Hospital as part of the THS, effectively demanding that he be silenced. He was then investigated for 2.5 years, despite no case of patient harm nor patient complaint, not dissimilar to Prof. Tim Noakes' experience in South Africa, except Gary's investigation was all done behind closed doors. He dared to challenge the nutritional advice given to his patients by dietitians and paid dearly for it, experiencing years of systemic bullying and harassment in his workplace, before being silenced in 2016. Silenced even from recommending his patients reduce sugar to improve their health outcomes. For a bit of perspective, AHPRA works in partnership with 15 national boards, from podiatry to pharmacy, as well as the nursing and medical boards. Their mission is to build community trust and protect public safety. Apparently, dietetics was deemed too low a risk to public safety to justify the costs of setting up regulation under AHPRA's framework in 2010. But occupational therapy is there, which is an important allied health position and much valued. But according to their parent body, occupational therapy enables people to participate in activities they find meaningful, like taking care of oneself and others, working, volunteering, and participating in hobbies and other social events. Is AHPRA really protecting the public from a dangerous profession? Dietitians, on the other hand, can perform tasks such as taking blood glucose levels, adjusting insulin doses, inserting nasogastric feeding tubes, and other procedures pertinent to meet the nutritional needs of patients at risk. Surely adjusting insulin doses and artificial feeding techniques come with risks to patient safety. For example, if the parenteral tube is incorrectly positioned, aspiration, potentially fatal, may occur. I think dietetics has far greater risks to patient safety than occupational therapy. The Dietitians Association of Australia claim to be the peak body for nutrition advice, educating Australians on healthy eating. Free from the AHPRA framework, the Dietitians Association of Australia is completely self-regulated. The DAA also provides accreditation, continuing education and resources for their dietitian members while receiving significant funding from the food industry. Can I just point out the hypocrisy of all of this? Gary was on trial for offering evidence-based nutrition advice, something not only deemed too low a risk to public safety, but something actually outside the scope of AHPRA's regulation. After 4.5 years of challenging the investigation, Gary finally received an unprecedented written apology from AHPRA, determining that not only is he free to talk about the health benefits of LCHF, but the wording clearly implies that there is no harm going forward for any other health professional in Australia to talk about LCHF too. But if that's the case, why are we still facing so many obstacles? How can we raise awareness of the health benefits of LCHF when the self-proclaimed peak body of nutrition, the Dietitians Association of Australia, continue to call low carb a fad diet? Not only that, a fad diet that lacks scientific evidence, but they love the new science behind breakfast, courtesy of the Australian Breakfast Cereal Manufacturers Forum. 2 years ago, I uncovered 4 documents outlining a corporate partnership between the DAA and the ABCMF, trading as cereal for brekkie. After alerting a few friends who dug further, we managed to uncover a treasure trove of alleged collusion. What I discovered was, for just $23,000 annually, the ABCMF expected the DAA to use their members to influence, protect, and actively defend cereal, grains, and even sugars messaging. Documents that specifically name my husband as the only practicing medical doctor targeted for active defence in 2013, remembering that not long afterwards, the then CEO of the DA, wrote those 2 letters to the hospital Gary was working at, effectively demanding he be silenced. According to a document under the heading ABCMF, Active Defence, consumer attitudes and consumption of breakfast cereal are being negatively impacted. In other words, cereal sales and corporate profits are down. The 4 major cereal companies that make up this ABCMF are Sanitarium, Nestle, Kellogg's and Freedom Foods. And they aren't happy. If low-carb diets are considered a fad diet by the DAA because they supposedly lack evidence, scientific evidence, maybe they should check out Virta Health's comprehensive list of low-carb research. The Public Health Collaboration UK also have studies listed on their website. In fact, 54 studies of 63 show a clear benefit of low-carb over low-fat diets. According to the DAA website, fad diets often cut out entire foods or food groups. But they happily endorse vegan diets, which strictly omit entire foods and even food groups. Let's go back to this 1940s poster I highlighted at the beginning of my talk, to a time when highly processed plant foods were still being invented, when meat and dairy were not just foods, but considered entire food groups, essential to our health. You would think that the optimal diet for human beings is the one that provides essential nutrients without fortifications or supplementation. The only 3 macronutrients we eat are fat, protein, and carbohydrate. There are essential fats, omega-3 and omega-6. There are essential proteins, the amino acids that the body can't make. But guess what? There are no essential carbohydrates. The DAA acknowledges a vegan diet needs careful consideration to ensure enough B12, iron, omega, and omega-3 fatty acids, and vitamin D. So let's consider vitamin B12. The Adventist Health Ministries provide a number of publicly available fact sheets on health and nutrition, and if you're considering a vegan diet, I highly recommend them, as they are a comprehensive resource. They state, vitamin B12 is of special interest to vegetarians, particularly total or pure vegetarians. They don't like to use the word vegan, since it is found only in animal-based products, including red meat, poultry, seafood, dairy products, and eggs. The question they frame is, why is vitamin B12 fortification of a plant diet necessary today if the original diet was ideal and ensured optimal health? The answer to their own question suggests that vitamin B12 was in the fruit of the tree of life, taken away by God after Eve succumbed to temptation when she ate the apple from the tree of knowledge. But, they conclude, we are sure of one thing. Long periods of no B12 intake produce serious vitamin deficiencies that impair our health. Dr. Georgia Eade believes vegan diets come with serious risks. They require carefully planned diets that make people dependent on experts, supplements, and fortified foods which by their very nature must be processed. Reese Southern, a recovering vegan, introduced me very early on to the Seventh-day Adventist ideology on his website, Let Them Eat Meat. His work is extensively researched and referenced, detailing the involvement and influence of Seventh-day Adventist dietitians on the American Dietary Guidelines for 60 years. Harry Miller was an Adventist medical missionary who spent nearly 70 years in China as a medical doctor and surgeon, a publisher of literacy evangelism, and as a food scientist. When he opened the New Nutrition Research Laboratory in 1953, he stated, "Science will be used to prove, not disprove, divine inspiration. The assurance that the Lord will give wisdom to those who study to find suitable substitutes for meat, eggs, and milk in the diet is a great stimulus." By 1958, his labs had developed new and improved soy milks and soy cream, acidophilus soy milk and ice cream, cholesterol-free cheese, and a non-dairy margarine. One of the technical experts employed at Miller's research laboratory was devout Adventist Dr. Mervyn Harding, who set about investigating the health status of Adventist vegetarians in 1948 for his doctoral dissertation at Harvard. His doctoral supervisor, Fred Steyer, has been since found to have strong ties to the sugar industry, determined to minimize the harms of sugar, and blames saturated animal fats for heart disease. In his book Health and Salvation, Mervyn Harding writes, "To protect us from moral pollution by keeping our minds clear and sharp, God, in his infinite wisdom and love, gave his remnant people the wonderful, scientifically vindicated message of health reform." Another of the technical experts employed at Miller's research laboratory was Seventh-day Adventist UD Register, one of 2 dietitians acknowledged as instrumental in getting vegetarianism accepted back into the American Dietetics Association. He stated, "Evidence will be presented to show how science has verified statements made over 50 years ago through the spirit of prophecy." But the influence of Adventist ideology goes even further back. Lena Francis Cooper founded the American Dietetics Association in 1917. She was a protege of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg and an early proponent of the Adventist health reform message at Battle Creek Sanitarium, integral to supporting medical evangelism and offering an entering wedge to the church through the Garden of Eden diet. She was considered a pioneer in the field of vegetarian nutrition and dietetics, with more than 500 dietitians graduating under her tutelage. But it was her role as the senior author of Nutrition in Health and Disease, a textbook that was used for 30 years in both dietetic and nursing programs around the world for Adventist and non-Adventist education, that made Lena Cooper famous worldwide. Vegetarianism was fully accepted by the American Dietetic Association in 1988. Of the 9 reviewers, every single one had a vested interest in a positive outcome. 5 of the reviewers were from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, including Kathleen Zolber, as a past president of the ADA, now known as the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Well, this piqued my interest, so I decided to investigate the DAA's Association, the Australian Dietitians Association's references on their vegetarian position statement, which has since been removed. Unlike the lengthy American list, we have only 4 references to back up the so-called scientific evidence the DAA requires to endorse a diet. The trouble is that all these articles were funded directly and indirectly by Sanitarium and Kellogg's. The timing ties in nicely with their ABCMF partnership. And we know how much the DAA loves cereal for brekkie. So this is concerning, not only for their members who should be able to trust their governing body to provide them with unbiased scientific research, but as the self-proclaimed peak body for nutrition, the DAA's blatant cherry-picking of data is also concerning for the general public. The authors of the 3rd reference have strong ties to Kellogg's, including a man named Victor Fulgoni, who was a past Vice President of Nutrition for the Kellogg's Company. The authors of the 1st and 2nd references are on the General Conference's Adventist Health Ministries and working at Seventh-day Adventist universities. The 4th reference, a supplement in the Medical Journal of Australia aimed at convincing doctors of the health benefits of a vegetarian diet, was paid for by Sanitarium and the General Conference Adventist Health Ministries. At least 9 of the authors are Seventh-day Adventists, and 14 are promoting vegan diets for health.